The morning sun cast long shadows across New Haven, a small human settlement on the edge of 442B's northern continent. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead as she tended to the hydroponic gardens that fed her community of 300 souls. The colony ship Endeavor had brought them here 12 years ago, seeking a peaceful life away from Earth's overcrowded cities and endless conflicts. They had seemed like ideal neighbors when first contact was made. Their crystalline bodies shimmered with an ethereal beauty, and their telepathic communications promised understanding between species. The galactic community had welcomed humanity with cautious optimism, and New Haven was established as a symbol of human adaptability and peaceful coexistence. The settlement's elected leader walked through the main street checking on his people. Children played in the central plaza while adults worked in workshops, crafting tools and maintaining the fusion reactors that powered their modest civilization. The humans had deliberately kept their technology simple here, wanting to live in harmony with the planet's existing ecosystem. "Commander," called out Doctor, the settlement's chief scientist and former naval officer. Her tone carried an urgency that made stomach tighten. "You need to see this. The orbital sensors are picking up massive energy signatures approaching from the territories." In the communication center, holographic displays showed a fleet of warships moving toward their sector. The crystalline vessels gleamed like deadly jewels against their numbers far exceeding anything seen during peaceful trade missions. Counted at least 50 ships, each one capable of reducing New Haven to ash within minutes. "They're not responding to our hail attempts," reported Lieutenant James Park, their communications officer. "Standard diplomatic channels are being ignored, and their formation suggests hostile intent." The truth became clear when intercepted military transmissions were decoded. High Command had decided that human expansion must be stopped before it became a threat to their empire. New Haven, despite its peaceful nature, was to be made an example. The message was simple. Humans would see the price of reaching too far into the galaxy. Sarah abandoned her gardens and ran toward the center of town as emergency sirens wailed across New Haven. Families gathered their children, confusion and fear spreading like wildfire through the community. These people had come here to escape violence, not to become its victims. Stood before his people in the plaza, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We have approximately 6 hours before the fleet reaches us. They've declared their intention to destroy our settlement as a warning to other human colonies." A young mother clutched her toddler. "What did we do wrong? We followed every treaty, respected every boundary they set." Doctor stepped forward, her scientific mind already working through possibilities. "Our mistake was existing where they could see us grow. They've watched us adapt to this world, watched us thrive, and decided we're becoming too successful." The settlement's small defense grid consisted of 3 orbital platforms and a handful of surface-to-air missile systems. Against a full battle fleet, they might as well throw stones at a hurricane. The colonists weren't soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, and dreamers who had sought peace among the stars. Activated the emergency broadcast system, sending distress signals toward Earth and the nearest human naval stations. Help, if it came at all, would arrive weeks too late. The nearest military vessel was a patrol frigate 3 systems away, and even the fastest ships couldn't cross the void quickly enough to matter. "We could evacuate," suggested Doctor, though her tone indicated she already knew the impossibility. "The cargo shuttles could take maybe 50 people to the mining station on 442C. "And leave the rest to die?" shook his head. "Besides, they just hunt down the survivors. This isn't about territory, it's about sending a message to humanity itself." As the hours passed, the people of New Haven made their preparations. Some wrote farewell messages to family on distant worlds. Others worked frantically to hide their research data and cultural artifacts, hoping future archaeologists might understand what they had tried to build here. Children were told stories to keep them calm, while adults struggled with their own terror. Sarah returned to her garden one final time, running her fingers through the soil where Earth seeds had learned to grow in alien ground. The irony wasn't lost on her that this place of growth and life would soon become a crater, another casualty in the galaxy's endless cycle of fear and violence. The fleet drew closer, their crystalline hulls reflecting the system's twin suns like harbingers of doom. In 6 hours, New Haven would be memory and ash, its destruction broadcast across known space as a warning to any species that dared to dream of expansion beyond there. Yet in those final hours, something remarkable began to happen. The people of New Haven didn't simply wait too. Doctor stared at the tactical display in New Haven's command center, her mind racing through possibilities that seemed increasingly desperate. The fleet maintained its approach vector, now less than 4 hours from weapons range. Their ships moved in perfect formation, crystalline hulls pulsing with the distinctive blue-white energy signatures of charged particle weapons. Called from across the room, "Whatever you're thinking, now would be the time to share it." She turned to face the assembled council members, scientists, and engineers who represented New Haven's leadership. "We've been approaching this like victims waiting for execution, but we're not just colonists anymore. We're humans, and humans have a very particular talent for surviving the impossible." Lieutenant Park looked up from his sensor readings. "The defensive platforms are armed and ready, but against 50 warships." "Forget the platforms," interrupted. "They want to make an example of us. Fine, let's give them an example they'll never forget." She moved to the central, calling up schematics of the settlement's infrastructure. "We have 3 fusion reactors, mining equipment capable of moving mountains, and industrial fabricators that can reshape matter at the molecular level." Young engineer Tommy leaned forward, his eyes bright with dangerous possibility. "You're talking about turning the entire settlement into a weapon." Nodded grimly. "They expect us to cower and die quietly. They've studied our diplomatic records, our peaceful intentions, our careful adherence to galactic law. What they haven't studied is human history when we're cornered with nothing left to lose." Sarah entered the command center, her clothes still dirty from the gardens. "The evacuation of non-essential personnel to the caves is complete. 67 people, mostly children and elderly, are now safely underground in the old mining tunnels." Felt a weight settle in his chest. 233 people remained in the settlement, all volunteers who had chosen to stay and fight rather than hide. Teachers stood beside engineers, farmers next to former military personnel, united in their refusal to die quietly. "What do you need?" asked. Doctor pulled up detailed schematics of the fusion reactors. 12 years ago, when we first established New Haven, I recommended building the reactors with Earth-Navy specifications rather than civilian ones. Emergency protocols, military-grade containment systems, the works. "You're planning to overload them," Tommy realized, his face pale. "You want to turn our home into a bomb." "Not a bomb," corrected. "Something much worse." She manipulated the holographic display, showing energy flow patterns and magnetic field configurations. "We're going to create an artificial star." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah was the first to speak. "How long would it take?" 3 hours to reconfigure the reactors and align the magnetic containment systems. 1 hour to evacuate everyone to minimum safe distance. His voice remained steady, clinical. "The detonation would create a hydrogen fusion cascade powerful enough to sterilize everything within a 50-kilometer radius." Lieutenant Park consulted his tactical display. "The fleet will be in bombardment formation by then. They'll be clustered together for maximum firepower concentration." "Exactly," brought up star charts showing the surrounding systems. "The energy signature will be visible across 3 sectors. Every species in this part of the galaxy will see what happens when you try to exterminate humans. They'll see that we don't just die. We burn everything down with us." Stared at the readouts, calculating the cost of his plan. The settlement they had spent 12 years building would be gone. The research data, the cultural artifacts, the careful work of creating a new home among the stars, all of it would become plasma and radiation. "There has to be another way," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah stepped closer to the display. "They have made their choice. They could have negotiated, could have established boundaries, could have found a dozen peaceful solutions. Instead, they chose genocide." Her voice hardened. "So we choose consequences." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Teams worked around the clock to modify reactor components, reroute power systems, and prepare the cascade sequence. The fusion plants that had peacefully powered their civilization were transformed into instruments of mutual annihilation. Tommy led the technical teams through modifications that pushed every system beyond safety limits. Magnetic containment fields were reconfigured to channel rather than contain the fusion reaction. Power couplings were hardwired to overload simultaneously. Safety protocols were systematically disabled or bypassed. Meanwhile, the fleet continued its approach, their long-range sensors detecting the increased energy activity around New Haven. Commander, the crystalline being commanding the assault force, interpreted the readings as desperate attempts to strengthen defensive positions. "The humans scramble like insects before the storm," he transmitted to his fleet. "Their primitive technology cannot protect them from the righteousness of our cause." His ship spread into attack formation, particle weapons charging with deadly light. The plan was simple: overwhelm the human defenses with concentrated firepower, then systematically destroy every structure until nothing remained but scorched earth. The recordings would be broadcast across known space as proof that expansion beyond one's carried consequences. Back in New Haven, made final adjustments to the cascade sequence. The reactors hummed with barely contained power, their safety systems screaming warnings that she systematically ignored. Magnetic field generators strained against loads they were never designed to bear. 20 minutes until the fleet reaches firing range, Park announced. Energy readings from their weapons arrays suggest they're planning total annihilation. Looked around the command center at the faces of her friends and colleagues. These were good people who had dreamed of building something beautiful among the stars. Now they prepared to die taking their enemies with them, writing a message in fire that would echo across the galaxy for generations. "Cascade sequence is armed and ready," she announced. "All personnel have 15 minutes to reach minimum safe distance." But as the countdown began, something unexpected happened. The commander made a tactical error that would change everything. Commander's tactical display showed New Haven spread below his fleet like a target waiting for destruction. The human settlement appeared defenseless, its small defensive platforms no match for the overwhelming firepower of 50 warships. What caught his attention were the unusual energy readings emanating from the colony's power sources. "Sub-Commander," he transmitted to his second-in-command, "the humans appear to be overloading their primitive fusion systems. Are they attempting to create a desperate energy weapon?" His crystalline form pulsed with amusement. "Impossible, Commander. Human technology lacks the sophistication for weaponizing stellar fusion. They're likely trying to boost their shield generators before we commence bombardment." Below on New Haven's surface, watched the fleet arrange itself in a perfect attack formation. The crystalline ships positioned themselves in a tight cluster to maximize their combined firepower, exactly as military doctrine dictated for overwhelming a static target. They had no idea they were positioning themselves directly above the largest explosive device ever conceived by human engineering. "All teams report status," spoke into her communicator. "Reactor 1 modified and armed," came Tommy's voice from the primary power station. "Magnetic containment is holding at maximum stress levels." "Reactor 2 ready," reported another team leader. "Safety interlocks disabled, cascade trigger installed." "Reactor 3 operational," confirmed the final team. "All reactors are now synchronized for simultaneous ignition." Stood beside, watching the tactical display with grim determination. In 10 minutes, the fleet would begin their bombardment. In 15 minutes, New Haven would be a crater. In 16 minutes, that crater would become a temporary star bright enough to blind sensors across 3-star systems. "Final evacuation check," announced. "All non-essential personnel should be in the caves by now." Sarah's voice crackled through the communicator from the underground shelters. 67 people secure in the deep tunnels. Emergency supplies for 3 weeks if anyone survives to need them. The remaining colonists had spread across New Haven to their final positions. Some manned the defensive platforms, determined to make the pay for every meter. Others worked to ensure the cascade sequence would trigger properly, knowing they would not survive to see its effects. A few simply stood in the streets, watching the sky and refusing to spend their last moments hiding underground. Lieutenant Park monitored communications as the fleet prepared to fire. "I'm intercepting their tactical chatter. Commander is planning a systematic bombardment starting with our communication arrays and defensive positions." Nodded. "Perfect. Let them think they're winning." She activated the settlement's emergency broadcast system, sending a final message toward Earth and every human colony within range. "This is Doctor of New Haven Colony. We are under attack by a fleet attempting to destroy our peaceful settlement. We have chosen to respond in a way that will ensure this aggression is never forgotten. To any species listening, understand this. Humanity does not die quietly. We burn everything down with us. The first particle beams lanced down from orbit, striking the defensive platforms in brilliant explosions. The small human installations vanished in seconds, their destruction broadcast triumphantly across military channels as proof of human weakness. Commander watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Begin systematic bombardment of the colony's infrastructure. Destroy their power generation first, then their communications, then their residential areas. Make it last long enough for proper recording. More energy beams descended from the crystalline ships, striking fusion reactor housing and communication towers. But something was wrong with the energy readings. Instead of dimming as their power sources were destroyed, the human settlement's energy signature was growing stronger. Sub-Commander transmitted with growing concern, the fusion readings are increasing exponentially. This cannot be a defensive measure. Below in New Haven's command center, watched her life's work being systematically destroyed by alien weapons fire. Each explosion sent tremors through the ground. Each blast brought the cascade sequence closer to critical threshold. Reactor 1 has taken direct hits, Tommy reported. Containment is destabilizing as planned. Magnetic field generators are beginning to fail in sequence. Reactor 2 showing critical overload, came another voice. The cascade reaction is beginning to propagate between the modified fusion chambers. Felt a strange calm settle over her. For 12 years, she had helped build something beautiful on this world. Gardens where earth plants learned to grow in alien soil, homes where human families had raised children under foreign stars, laboratories where researchers had unlocked the secrets of an entire new ecosystem. All of that was burning now under weapons fire, but from its ashes would rise something that would change the balance of power across the galaxy. She said quietly, "You should head for the caves. Someone needs to survive to tell this story." Shook his head. "My people chose to stay and fight. Their leader stays with them." More explosions rocked the settlement as bombardment intensified. They were being methodical, destroying each building with precision while their sensors recorded the effects for future psychological warfare campaigns. They wanted other species to see exactly what happened to those who challenged dominance. "Cascade sequence entering final phase," announced to the remaining personnel. "All reactors showing critical fusion propagation, detonation in approximately 3 minutes." High above, Commander finally understood what the energy readings meant. The humans had not been trying to defend themselves. They had been building a weapon of such devastating power that its effects would be felt across multiple star systems. "All ships, emergency retreat," he transmitted frantically. "The humans are creating an artificial stellar ignition, maximum burn on all engines." But 50 warships moving in tight formation could not scatter quickly enough to escape the blast radius of an artificial star. The crystalline vessels burned their engines at maximum power, trying desperately to reach minimum safe distance before the human settlement completed its transformation into a temporary supernova. Smiled as she watched the ships fleeing in panic on her tactical display. They had come expecting to find victims. Instead, they had found humans. The cascade sequence reached critical mass, and New Haven became light itself. The artificial star that had been New Haven burned for 17 seconds before its fury finally exhausted itself. In those 17 seconds, the light was visible from 3 star systems away, a brilliant beacon that's twin suns. The electromagnetic pulse from the detonation disabled communications across a 30-light-year radius, plunging dozens of worlds into temporary darkness. When the light faded, nothing remained of New Haven but a perfectly circular crater of fused glass stretching 50 kilometers in diameter. The fleet had been caught in the outer edge of the blast, their crystalline hulls cracked, and their crews stunned by radiation exposure that would have been lethal to organic beings. Commander's flagship, the Eternal Prism, limped through space on failing engines, its navigation systems scrambled by electromagnetic interference. Of the 50 ships that had approached New Haven with such confidence, only 23 remained operational. The rest drifted as lifeless hulks, their crystalline matrices shattered by forces beyond their designer's imagination. 3 days later, the first rescue vessels arrived to find survivors in the underground caves where Sarah and 66 other colonists had waited out humanity's first stellar weapon. The caves had protected them from the initial blast, though the radiation levels above ground would remain dangerous for months. Admiral of the Earth Defense Force stood at the edge of the glass crater, her environmental suit's sensors clicking constantly as they measured residual radiation. Behind her, worked to recover what little remained of New Haven's cultural artifacts, finding only twisted metal and memories fused into the crystalline ground. 67 survivors out of 300, she reported to Earth Command via quantum communicator. The colonists who remained above ground died in the Cascade detonation, but their sacrifice eliminated 37 warships and forced the remainder to retreat with heavy damage. Dr. Sarah emerged from the cave complex, her face gaunt from 3 days without proper food or medical attention. The hydroponic gardens she had tended for 12 years were now atoms scattered across the planet's upper atmosphere, but the woman who had grown them survived to tell their story. Doctor knew exactly what she was doing, Sarah told the Admiral. Every calculation, every modification, every risk assessment. She turned our home into a weapon that could be seen from Rigel. They came here expecting to make an example of us. Instead, we made an example of them. Within hours of the rescue fleet's arrival, recordings of the New Haven incident began spreading across the galactic communications network. Every species with interstellar capability received the same message. Humans would not submit to genocide quietly. They would drag their enemies into the fire with them, creating weapons of such devastating power that their destruction would be visible across the galaxy. The High Command convened an emergency session as reports of the fleet's defeat reached there of Crystalline Prime. Commander, his crystalline matrix cracked and his voice weakened by radiation damage, transmitted his report from a medical facility. The humans possess military capabilities far exceeding our intelligence estimates, he reported. They weaponize stellar fusion using primitive equipment, creating a localized stellar ignition that destroyed our entire assault force. High, leader of the Empire, studied the tactical recordings with growing alarm. The energy readings from New Haven's final moments showed a level of destructive power that challenged even technology. More disturbing was the calculated precision with which the humans had executed their desperate plan. This was not the action of a primitive species, she concluded. These humans deliberately transformed their settlement into a weapon capable of sterilizing an entire region. They sacrificed everything they had built to deliver a message we cannot ignore. Across the galaxy, other species watched the recordings with fascination and terror. The Republic immediately revised their assessment of human military capabilities. The Vegan Confederacy began emergency sessions to discuss potential defensive measures against stellar weapons. Even the ancient ethereals, who had remained neutral in galactic politics took notice of the species that could turn a peaceful colony into a temporary star. On Earth, the news of New Haven's destruction sparked massive demonstrations. Some protested the colonists' radical response, arguing that such weapons violated every principle of civilized warfare. Others hailed Doctor and her team as heroes who had prevented the genocide of human colonies across the galaxy. Admiral submitted her final report to the Earth Defense Council 3 weeks after the incident. The tactical implications of New Haven cannot be overstated. Every human colony now possesses the theoretical capability to create stellar-class weapons using standard fusion infrastructure. The psychological impact on potential aggressors will be significant. President, Sarah's cousin and leader of the Earth Colonial Administration, addressed the galactic community from the emergency session of the Interstellar Council on Luna Station. The destruction of New Haven represents a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics, she declared. Humanity will no longer accept genocide as an acceptable response to our expansion. Any species that attempts to destroy human settlements should understand that we will respond with weapons capable of sterilizing star systems. The delegation attempted to justify their attack as a preemptive defense against human expansion, but their arguments fell on deaf ears. The recordings of New Haven's final moments had already spread throughout known space, accompanied by Doctor's final transmission explaining the colonists' choice to die fighting rather than submit to extinction. Within 6 months, the New Haven Doctrine became official Earth military policy. Every human colony would be equipped with the capability to create stellar weapons using their fusion infrastructure. The technical specifications, developed from final recordings, were distributed to every human settlement beyond Earth's solar system. The galaxy had wanted to make an example of a peaceful human village. Instead, that village had made an example that would echo through history. No species would ever again consider humanity an easy target for genocide. The price of attacking human civilians had been set at New Haven, written in light bright enough to see from 3-star systems away. But the story of New Haven was far from over. The consequences of that 17-second star would reshape galactic politics in ways no one could have predicted, least of all the traumatized survivors emerging from their underground shelter into a world that no longer existed. 10 years after New Haven became a temporary star, Sarah stood in the central plaza of Crystalline Prime, the capital world of the Empire. The irony was not lost on her that she now governed the same species that had tried to exterminate her people. The crystal spires around her pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns, a language of light that she had learned to read fluently during her tenure as Earth's ambassador to the Reformed Republic. The transformation had not been immediate. In the years following the New Haven incident, the Empire had descended into civil war as different factions blamed each other for the catastrophic defeat. The military who had ordered the attack found themselves facing a revolt from moderate who questioned the wisdom of provoking a species capable of weaponizing stars. High had been the first to fall, her crystalline matrix shattered by rebels who accused her of leading their empire toward extinction. Commander, his body still bearing radiation scars from New Haven, had become an unlikely advocate for peace, using his first-hand experience of human determination to argue against further aggression. The humans do not simply defend themselves, he had before the emergency tribunals that reshaped society. They obliterate everything, including themselves, rather than submit to conquest. To fight them is to fight a species that treats mutual annihilation as an acceptable outcome. Sarah walked through the government complex, where she had spent the last 3 years, helping establish the new democratic institutions that replaced the old imperial system. They had requested human assistance in rebuilding their society, recognizing that their crystalline psychology made them vulnerable to authoritarian control when faced with external threats. The New Haven Doctrine had indeed changed galactic politics, but not in the way anyone had expected. Rather than creating a new arms race, it had sparked a wave of democratic revolutions across the galaxy as oppressed populations realized that sufficiently motivated defenders could threaten even the most powerful empires. The Republic had overthrown its own military junta after discovering that the generals had been planning their own preemptive strikes against human colonies. The Vegan Confederacy had reformed its government to prevent the kind of centralized decision-making that had led to aggression. Even the ancient ethereals had emerged from their isolation to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. "Ambassador," called out as he approached across the plaza. His crystalline form still showed the radiation damage from New Haven, creating fractal patterns that had become symbols of the new identity. "The Council is ready for your presentation on the colonial integration protocols." Sarah nodded, reviewing her notes one final time. Today's session would determine whether the former colonies would be granted full autonomy or remain under the protective oversight of the Earth Colonial Administration. It was delicate work, balancing the legitimate security concerns of species that had been conquered by the old empire with the need to prevent future conflicts. The council chamber represented everything the old empire had opposed. Representatives from dozens of species sat together, their varied forms united in democratic governance rather than divided by conquest. Crystalline debated alongside gaseous and silicon-based, all of them working to build something that had never existed in this part of the galaxy, a truly representative government. "The integration of former imperial territories must be voluntary," Sarah addressed the assembly. "The human position is clear. No species should be forced to join our civilization, but neither should any species be allowed to force others to remain under their control." The debate that followed would have been impossible under the old empire, where the highest word was law and dissent was literally impossible due to the hive-mind tendencies of psychology. Now, individuals argued passionately with each other, their newly developed capacity for independent thought creating a chaos of perspectives that somehow resolved into wisdom. 3 days later, the vote was unanimous. All former territories would be granted the right to self-determination, with human peacekeepers providing security during the transition period. It was a victory for the principles that the colonists of New Haven had died to defend, even if they could never see the world they had created. That evening, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the council building, looking up at the star-filled sky above Crystalline Prime. Somewhere out there, in the direction of 442b, a fused glass crater marked the place where New Haven had once stood. The radiation levels had finally dropped enough to allow resettlement, and plans were to build a memorial garden where hydroponic farms had once grown. Joined her at the railing, his damaged crystalline form refracting the city lights into rainbow patterns. "Do you ever wonder what Doctor would think of all this?" he asked, his translated voice carrying genuine curiosity. Sarah smiled, remembering her friend's dry humor and relentless determination. "Would probably complain that we're taking too long to implement the agricultural reforms. She never did have much patience for bureaucracy." "The Memorial Committee has approved the design for the New Haven Monument," reported. "A crystalline obelisk containing holographic recordings of all 300 colonists, surrounded by gardens growing earth plants in soil. The inscription will read, 'Here lived humans who refused to die quietly.' The monument would join dozens of others across the galaxy, marking the places where the New Haven Doctrine had prevented conflicts before they could begin. The mere knowledge that human colonies could defend themselves with stellar weapons had made potential aggressors reconsider their plans, creating a peace born from the promise of mutual destruction. But the real legacy of New Haven lay in the transformed galaxy around them. The Republic had become a model for democratic reform, inspiring other species to overthrow their own authoritarian governments. Trade routes that had once been controlled by imperial fleets were now protected by multinational peacekeeping forces. Scientific cooperation had replaced military competition as species worked together to understand the cosmic forces that humans had weaponized. "I received a message from the Nebula colonies today," Sarah continued. "They're requesting human advisors to help establish their first democratic parliament. Apparently, they've heard about our success here on Crystalline Prime." It was a strange reversal of fortune. 10 years ago, humanity had been seen as a minor species suitable only for extermination or vassalage. Now, human political advisors were in demand across the galaxy, their expertise in democracy and individual rights suddenly valuable to species emerging from imperial rule. The Earth Colonial Administration had established the New Haven Institute on Luna, training diplomats and political scientists to help rebuild galactic civilization according to the principles that and her colleagues had died defending. Students from dozens of worlds came to study human concepts of representative government, individual liberty, and the right of self-determination. Sarah's communicator chimed with an incoming message from Admiral, now head of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. "Sarah, we've received a request from the Contact Committee. They want to establish formal relations with the Earth Alliance and specifically requested you as their liaison." There were beings from outside the Milky Way galaxy, recently arrived through some form of faster-than-light travel that even human scientists couldn't understand. Their interest in humanity was reportedly based on intercepted broadcasts of the New Haven incident, which they had somehow detected across intergalactic distances. "It seems our reputation has spread beyond our own galaxy," observed, reading the message over her shoulder with typical directness. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity not because of their technological superiority or military might, but because of their absolute refusal to accept extinction quietly. That lesson was apparently spreading beyond the borders of known space, carried by the light of a 17-second star that had burned bright enough to see from anywhere. As she prepared for the next phase of her diplomatic career, Sarah reflected on the price of the peace they had achieved. 300 good people had died to create the world she now helped govern, had never seen the gardens that would grow in her memory, had never witnessed the democratic institutions that his sacrifice had made possible. But their deaths had not been in vain. Across the galaxy, billions of beings lived in freedom because a small human colony had chosen to burn everything down rather than submit to genocide. The New Haven Doctrine had taught the galaxy a simple lesson. Humanity would rather rule over ashes than live as slaves. And now, 10 years later, humanity ruled neither ashes nor slaves, but a galaxy united in the principles of freedom and self-determination that had always been worth dying to defend. The village that had refused to die quietly had become the foundation of a new galactic civilization, built on the understanding that some things were worth any sacrifice to preserve. The stars above Crystalline Prime twinkled peacefully in the night sky, each one representing worlds where beings could choose their own destiny without fear of imperial conquest. It was greatest garden, and it was still growing. The morning sun cast long shadows across New Haven, a small human settlement on the edge of 442B's northern continent. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead as she tended to the hydroponic gardens that fed her community of 300 souls. The colony ship Endeavor had brought them here 12 years ago, seeking a peaceful life away from Earth's overcrowded cities and endless conflicts. They had seemed like ideal neighbors when first contact was made. Their crystalline bodies shimmered with an ethereal beauty, and their telepathic communications promised understanding between species. The galactic community had welcomed humanity with cautious optimism, and New Haven was established as a symbol of human adaptability and peaceful coexistence. The settlement's elected leader walked through the main street checking on his people. Children played in the central plaza while adults worked in workshops, crafting tools and maintaining the fusion reactors that powered their modest civilization. The humans had deliberately kept their technology simple here, wanting to live in harmony with the planet's existing ecosystem. "Commander," called out Doctor, the settlement's chief scientist and former naval officer. Her tone carried an urgency that made stomach tighten. "You need to see this. The orbital sensors are picking up massive energy signatures approaching from the territories." In the communication center, holographic displays showed a fleet of warships moving toward their sector. The crystalline vessels gleamed like deadly jewels against their numbers far exceeding anything seen during peaceful trade missions. Counted at least 50 ships, each one capable of reducing New Haven to ash within minutes. "They're not responding to our hail attempts," reported Lieutenant James Park, their communications officer. "Standard diplomatic channels are being ignored, and their formation suggests hostile intent." The truth became clear when intercepted military transmissions were decoded. High Command had decided that human expansion must be stopped before it became a threat to their empire. New Haven, despite its peaceful nature, was to be made an example. The message was simple. Humans would see the price of reaching too far into the galaxy. Sarah abandoned her gardens and ran toward the center of town as emergency sirens wailed across New Haven. Families gathered their children, confusion and fear spreading like wildfire through the community. These people had come here to escape violence, not to become its victims. Stood before his people in the plaza, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We have approximately 6 hours before the fleet reaches us. They've declared their intention to destroy our settlement as a warning to other human colonies." A young mother clutched her toddler. "What did we do wrong? We followed every treaty, respected every boundary they set." Doctor stepped forward, her scientific mind already working through possibilities. "Our mistake was existing where they could see us grow. They've watched us adapt to this world, watched us thrive, and decided we're becoming too successful." The settlement's small defense grid consisted of 3 orbital platforms and a handful of surface-to-air missile systems. Against a full battle fleet, they might as well throw stones at a hurricane. The colonists weren't soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, and dreamers who had sought peace among the stars. Activated the emergency broadcast system, sending distress signals toward Earth and the nearest human naval stations. Help, if it came at all, would arrive weeks too late. The nearest military vessel was a patrol frigate 3 systems away, and even the fastest ships couldn't cross the void quickly enough to matter. "We could evacuate," suggested Doctor, though her tone indicated she already knew the impossibility. "The cargo shuttles could take maybe 50 people to the mining station on 442C. "And leave the rest to die?" shook his head. "Besides, they just hunt down the survivors. This isn't about territory, it's about sending a message to humanity itself." As the hours passed, the people of New Haven made their preparations. Some wrote farewell messages to family on distant worlds. Others worked frantically to hide their research data and cultural artifacts, hoping future archaeologists might understand what they had tried to build here. Children were told stories to keep them calm, while adults struggled with their own terror. Sarah returned to her garden one final time, running her fingers through the soil where Earth seeds had learned to grow in alien ground. The irony wasn't lost on her that this place of growth and life would soon become a crater, another casualty in the galaxy's endless cycle of fear and violence. The fleet drew closer, their crystalline hulls reflecting the system's twin suns like harbingers of doom. In 6 hours, New Haven would be memory and ash, its destruction broadcast across known space as a warning to any species that dared to dream of expansion beyond there. Yet in those final hours, something remarkable began to happen. The people of New Haven didn't simply wait to die.